My dear brothers and sisters, today's session is based on Sri Aurobindo's major work, The Synthesis of Yoga. And in that, the introductory part has 5 chapters. And this is the 4th of those chapters, titled The Systems of Yoga. And in this chapter, Sri Aurobindo looks at the 3 major systems of yoga that he has incorporated in his synthesis. Sri Aurobindo worked out a very powerful synthesis of the major traditional schools of yoga about 100 years ago. And in this chapter, he looks at the 3 major schools that he has taken into account while working out that synthesis. That is Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, and the Yoga of the Gita. When Sri Aurobindo decides to take a look at any subject, one thing is guaranteed. He'll look at it in a unique way. In fact, unique is an understatement. He looks at it in a way that is completely out of this world. And how does he achieve that? He achieves it because he looks at the issue in a global, comprehensive, all-inclusive manner, leaving nothing out. And how is he able to do it in a relatively limited space? That he is able to do because he goes to the heart of the issue. He is one who does not care for minutiae, minute details, trivia, with which we sometimes cramp our descriptions of anything. He goes to the heart of the issue, keeps the spirit of the subject alive, and does not bother much about inconsequential minor details as well as the trivial things which may clutter the issue. And that's how he is able to maintain the true spirit of the subject and in a way that leaves nothing important out. So he looks at it in a really global, all-inclusive, comprehensive way. The second thing that makes his way of looking at the issue completely out of this world is that he looks at it in a radical way. The word radical has 2 connotations. One is something fundamental, something that is at the very root of the subject. The second connotation of the word radical is that it is a completely unconventional, revolutionary way of looking at it. Both of these apply to Sri Aurobindo. When he looks at an issue, he looks at it in a radical manner. He goes to the heart, the root, the very origin of the subject. How did the subject happen to be there at all? And then, his way of looking at it is also revolutionary. He looks at it in a way that nobody has looked at earlier. Not only nobody has looked at it in that way earlier, probably nobody can even imagine that the subject can be looked at in that way. And that is what makes it a radical approach. So, that is something which you will find here also. When he has looked at Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, and the Yoga of the Gita, he has looked at it in his own characteristic way, completely out of this world, in a global manner, leaving nothing essential out, and also in a way that goes to the root of the subject and in a revolutionary manner. Now, one fundamental thing that he points out while looking at yoga as a whole in this chapter is that yoga is a system, a discipline that goes beyond the intentions of nature. The divine has used nature as its executive power. The divine had a certain intention, and then to execute it, it has used nature or Prakriti. The Purusha has used the Prakriti to do that. And the Prakriti has tried to translate that intention of the divine through various forms on this earth, through matter, through living creatures, plants, animals, and so on. But then the nature had certain intentions in creating all these, and also placed certain limits. It gave only a limited expression to the divine that it was trying to express, and it expressed it in each form, in each creature, to the extent that was necessary for keeping that creature alive, for ensuring its existence, limited existence. After all the creatures that came, they also had a limited life, they died. So with those limitations limitations were a part of the way nature executed the plan. But then in human beings, it ended up doing in a way that probably went, or at least had the potential of going beyond the intentions. The intention is to keep the creature alive, and that is how nature constituted man also. But man was not satisfied just to be alive. He didn't want to just exist. He wanted to live. And that urge was also apparently planted there by nature. But then now it was to be worked out in a way that the original intentions of nature get exceeded. And that was really a radical and beautiful way of looking at yoga. That yoga is a discipline that takes human beings beyond the apparent intentions of nature. And we can take an analogy. Suppose there is an apple tree, and the gardener plucks those apples, packs them in a box, and thereby is trying to fulfill the intentions of nature. Nature has constituted the apple to be eaten, and the gardener is facilitating it by packing them in a box, then selling them somewhere, and so that people can buy it and then eat it. Now here, if you consider tree to be the divine and the gardener to be nature who is executing the plan, then just imagine, suppose these apples develop an intense aspiration to once again reunite with the tree. Now, obviously, the original intentions of nature are being exceeded. Then you will not be able to eat the apples. But fortunately, apples don't do that. But human beings do exactly that. At least some human beings do. They develop this aspiration to reunite with the source, the divine itself, and thereby they are apparently exceeding the intentions of nature in all living creatures, and in fact also in a large number of human beings. Because the mother has said that by and large most people live a life as favorites of nature, which means they live a life which is in keeping with the way nature has constituted them. Which means that their life also basically revolves around existence, around the basic needs. So man is only a shade better than other animals who are basically feeding and breeding creatures. Man is only a shade better, and most people are quite content to live a life that revolves around these basic activities of feeding and breeding. But then there are a few human beings at least, and it's not that they are exceptional, they are different from others, in the sense that each individual's soul is on a journey, and it all depends upon how much of that journey has already been completed in previous lives. And after a certain amount of progress has been made in previous lives, then there comes a stage when the individual is no longer satisfied to live as a favorite of nature. Now the individual wants to exceed the intentions of nature. So that happens at least in some human beings who have covered quite a bit of the journey of their individual soul beyond a point, and but that doesn't happen in apples, obviously, and that's why there is a great deal of order exactly as nature intended. So that would be one way of looking at yoga, that we are trying to use certain methods, a methodized effort as Sri Aurobindo calls it, to exceed the original intentions of nature in human beings, go beyond the way we have been constituted. So basically there are three things involved here. One is the individual, and the other is nature who has constituted that individual, and the third is God or the divine, who now is either trying to attract the individual, or the individual has an inbuilt aspiration to go towards the divine. To some extent both are true, the individual feels the pull, and the divine exerts the pull, because that is the way the individual human souls have been constituted to be on that journey which will ultimately make them unite with the divine. That is the ultimate destiny of each individual soul. And therefore, that is in keeping with the intentions of the divine, although apparently nature does not necessitate that. But all the same, the nature leaves that provision, and that's how human beings are able to do it. So there are basically these three entities involved: the divine, whose plan is being executed by nature, nature itself, which has placed certain limitations on the expression of the divine in all creatures, including human beings, and the individual who wants to transcend those limitations, overcome those limitations, express more of the divinity than nature has intended. And human beings have that aspiration as well as the capacity to go beyond the way they have been constituted, to go beyond the way they arrive in this world. So in each life, the person has this possibility of going beyond this. Now, therefore, we have to relate these three things: the divine, nature, and the individual. And for that, it's important to understand the individual. The individual has basically, you can say, three quite obvious parts of the being and a fourth hidden entity. The visible parts are the body or the physical, the life force, the vital, and in vital is included not only the life force, which gives us the capacity to live, but also the emotional part of the being, which is essential for creating in us an urge to live. So both the capacity to live and the urge to live are important. Both these are a part of the vital, and both these can be considered two different aspects of the same life force, one enabling us to stay alive and another motivating us to stay alive. Both are important. So that is the vital. And then the mental. The mental, which is the unique, you can say, achievement or attribute of human beings. Animals also have it, at least the higher animals do, but human being is the only creature who has an extremely well-developed mental part of the being, or the intellect, which enables this human being to think to an extent that he has been able to plant or place man on the moon. So all that man has been able to do using this intellect. But then apart from this body, the emotional part of the being, and the intellect, is the soul, that is the divine essence of the person, and that is what constitutes the individual. And it is this individual as a whole that we have to understand yoga, because the individual as a whole is trying to transcend some of the limitations that have been built into the way we are constituted. The body has certain limitations, the life force has limitations, the mental part of the being has limitations. The soul, being the divine essence, may not have limitations, but it also in a way has a limitation, in the sense that it stays in the background and it is not able to actually prevail upon the individual. It is not able to compel the individual to organize its life around the divine essence. So that is the limitation of even the soul that happens to be there. Now we can take another analogy to understand this. We can look upon the individual as a school. And the body is the school building. The building has been constructed, and in this building have been placed two students, just two students, the emotional part of the being and the intellect, the vital and the mental. And also a teacher, the soul. The soul is a super teacher with a PhD, and has learnt everything very faithfully from whatever the divine wanted to teach it. It's a very efficient, well-qualified and learned teacher who knows essentially all what the original founder of the school, that is the divine, whatever the founder of the school intended for this particular individual, that much it has learnt to the last detail. So that is the soul. Now, there are two ways in which the students can learn in this school. One is that the students can learn from each other. The junior student can learn from the senior student. So who is the senior student? The mental, the intellect. Why? Because it came later, it evolved later, you can say. So you can say that's the senior student. The emotional part of the being is the junior student. So one way to learn is that the vital can learn from the mental, the emotional part of the being can learn from the intellect. The second way is that both the students decide to learn from the super teacher, the soul. These are the two ways in which it can happen. And both these things we'll sort of see how they are important when we consider different systems of yoga. So let's now start with the first system that Sri Aurobindo looks at, and that is Hatha Yoga. Now in Hatha Yoga, what basically the yogi tries to do is to transcend the limitations of the body by letting the higher principle, that is the vital, work on it more freely. Because that is how the body can be perfected, which means it can do more than what it normally does. Another way to look at it would be it can be liberated. It can be liberated from its limitations. Various limitations about how much it can do. So in terms of how essential food is for this body, how essential air is for this body, or the fact that this body is subject to decay and degeneration and eventual death. Now, to what extent this body is able to overcome these limitations, in that sense, get liberated from these limitations by achieving a certain amount of perfection, and that it can do by letting a higher principle, which came later, that is the vital, act upon it, and that is what a Hatha Yogi essentially does. And for that, two things are important. One is that the body should be in a state of quietude, peace. It should not have any restless activity. To some extent, in fact, the restless activity of the body indicates that it also has a certain urge for the vital to act more on it. So that is sort of the restlessness of the body, and that restlessness has to be cured first so that the vital can act, and that is what asanas essentially end up doing, because the most essential thing that happens in the asanas is actually total relaxation of the body and reducing to the minimum, if not totally abolishing, the normal restlessness of the body. And that clears the ground for the vital or the life force to act on it. Or say, to take this analogy of the school, here what is happening is that the junior student has decided to renovate the building. So the junior student, that is the vital, is now going in for a renovation so that now the school building looks better, it becomes more functional, it makes sure that all the plumbing, and the electrical connections and everything is working fine, and maybe puts a few pictures here and there. So all that it is trying to do. Now when you talk of plumbing, one of the things that pranayamas, which is again one of the Hatha Yogic techniques, do is to clear the nervous channels, as the yogis call them. They clear those blocks, they open up wherever there was a block in the chakras and so on, so they open it up. So in other words, this junior student in the school is doing a thorough overhaul of the building so that now the building can run a better school. Because while I'm in the school, what is important in the school are the students and the teacher. But at the same time, this is not an online school. It is a school with bricks and mortar. And therefore, the building is also necessary. And the building is the body. And the better the building, the better the school will be able to function. And that is what this junior student takes on in the system that we call Hatha Yoga. It works on the school building and what impressive results it can achieve. Hatha yogis who devote all their attention to perfecting the body using the techniques of asanas and pranayamas are able to overcome illness, more or less overcome death, overcome their dependence on food and air, and perform many things which we identify as all the miraculous feats of which Hatha yogis are capable. All that they are able to do by using the Hatha yogic techniques, which are called the Hatha yogic siddhis, or the things which Hatha yogis can do perfectly, which are beyond the imagination of the ordinary human being. So in that sense, nature's intentions have been exceeded. Nature didn't intend the human body to be that perfect. Of course, it's very marvelously constructed even in the ordinary person. We sometimes underestimate its capacity to stay healthy and to heal itself. And that is what modern medicine has done. Sri Aurobindo says, modern medicine has taught us to get dependent on modern medicine. That's what modern medicine has done. And the result is that we do not have full confidence in the capacity of the body to stay healthy and to heal itself. In fact, the body, even the ordinary normal body, leave aside the Hatha yogi, is geared for health rather than disease. And if we just leave it alone and let it function properly, just provide it the basic necessary conditions for proper functioning, it will stay healthy most of the time in most of us. And if at all something goes wrong, it will also recover without any external intervention. So in that sense, the doctor is not essential. Animals live their normal lifespan without getting any medical attention. Human beings have done the same in prehistoric times, and that's also possible. So anyway, so the important thing is that the body is marvelously constructed, even as it is ordinarily, but then it can be further improved upon when we let the higher principle, the vital, act on it, and that is what the Hatha yogis are able to do and achieve these extremely impressive results. And then, Sri Aurobindo points out that all that is very good, but then it also has a weakness. The weakness is what use it is to have that perfect body if all the time has to be spent on achieving that physical perfection, because that is what a Hatha yogi has to do. He has to spend all his time on just achieving that perfection, on concentrating on these Hatha yogic techniques. And then, it cannot be really put to any use in the world for our normal everyday activities, and that becomes a weakness. And it is because of that while all of us may get impressed by Hatha yoga, most of us do not actually take to it with that intensity, because we are not interested in that type of miraculous feats, and in fact we feel that that type of Hatha yoga is meant only for a select few, and we are quite content with that. So Sri Aurobindo says that is the major weakness of Hatha yoga, that these impressive results are achieved at great cost. There's a parable attributed to probably Sri Ramakrishna, that once a Hatha yogi was trying to impress him that over the last 20 years or whatever, I have perfected my body to such an extent that I can walk on water, because becoming extremely light is also one of the Hatha yogic siddhis. One can become extremely light. That's how they can float upwards. So he said that I can now walk on water and cross the stream walking. So then Sri Ramakrishna told him, but all the perfection that you achieved is worth only 25 paisa or so. Those is 4 annas. Why? Because I can pay that amount to a boatman and he'll take me across the stream. So that is how, years and decades of decades spent on achieving these Hatha yogic siddhis is not really worth it. And also, it can be ego boosting. The person may become an exhibitionist and boost his ego by displaying these powers, and people will naturally admire, clap, applaud, and appreciate, and that's what he starts enjoying. Now we go to the next school which Sri Aurobindo has looked at, and that is Raja Yoga. Just as the Hatha Yoga concentrates on the body, Raja Yoga concentrates on the mind. And mind, broadly speaking, has these two aspects: the vital part, that is the emotional part of the being, and the intellect. And that is one of the difficulties of the ordinary mind, which Raja Yoga tries to overcome. What is the limitation? The limitation is that the vital and the mental are at war with each other. The senior student is supposed to be teaching the junior student, and the intellect is supposed to be teaching the emotional part of the being, but instead the junior student is so rebellious and so aggressive that it ends up overpowering the senior student, and the result is the two are constantly at war, and most of the time it is the vital dominating the mental. The vital says, I want to eat some more. The mental says, I am full, I should not overeat. And the vital says, some more please, and the mental says, no more, not good for you. But then we find so often it is the vital that ends up winning. So that is one difficulty, one limitation of the way we have been constituted. Nature has very thoughtfully planted these two students so that the senior student can teach the junior student, but it doesn't work. The second limitation is that the teacher himself is also there in the form of the soul. That is ignored by both. The vital ignores it because when it doesn't suit it, it just ignores it. And not only does that, it exploits the mental so that the mental also will start speaking the language of the vital. And the mental on its own also is not very fond of the soul, because the mental, working on the basis of reason, has a tendency to look for those options in life which will be most profitable and least risky. So it's doing all the time that analysis of cost and benefit, risk and benefit, profit and loss, and it goes for the option which is most profitable and least risky. And these are not necessarily the best options. These are not the type of options that the super teacher, the soul, would like it to go for. So both these continue to ignore the soul. So if the mind has to be perfected, both these things are important. The war between the vital and the mental, between the emotions and the intellect, has to be resolved. And secondly, the soul has to be brought forwards in the front so that it can teach both to behave, the vital and the mental. And that is what the Raja Yogi does. And how does he do it? He does it by realizing that the school cannot exist in isolation without the building. So it does pay some attention to the building. It achieves stillness of the body, and then it proceeds to achieve a similar stillness of the mind, in which stillness of the body, asanas help. Stillness of the mind, pranayamas help by working on the body on one hand, and by clearing those nervous channels, or you can say in a broad way, by working on the nervous system, which is the physical sort of channel for communicating the life force as well as the emotions and the ideas from the universal consciousness. Because ultimately the school is so constituted that the building is important even for channelizing the forces of the intellect. So all the feelings and thoughts that we have actually are coming from the universal consciousness, and depending upon the type of instrument, that is the type of nervous system we have, we are able to give an expression to some of those feelings and thoughts. So that is the way we are constituted, and by working on that instrument, that is the nervous system, which the prana is able to do by letting the life force move forward freely in that structure, that is the nervous system, we are able to tap more from the universal consciousness, which means we are able to bring that higher force to work on the elements of the vital and the mental, so that they will now start behaving better and get more tuned to the soul. And therefore, some basic elements of these Hatha Yogic techniques, asanas and pranayamas, are also included in Raja Yoga. That is what is behind one of the common statements, that Hatha Yoga is a part of Raja Yoga. But then we also have to realize that doesn't mean that all the comprehensive, cumbersome techniques of Hatha Yoga are a part of Raja Yoga. Patanjali gives just a few lines here and there to asanas and pranayamas. only to the extent that is necessary for achieving that stillness of the body and the mind, so that the mind can transcend its limitations. So the focus of the Raja Yoga is on the mind, and to the extent necessary, it uses the Hatha Yogic techniques, just the basic elements, the basic principles of those techniques, so that the mind can be put in a proper shape and it is totally aligned to the divine. And for this, the background is prepared by just doing those simple things, which to an ordinary person are also things which should be done by a good person who has a certain degree of purity of feelings and thoughts. Things like not telling a lie, not stealing, not being greedy, not being attached to sensory pleasures, not collecting things beyond our needs, and concentrating on what really we are interested in, and being contented with what we have, and so on and so forth. Now these are the yamas and the niyamas. They prepare the background. Now here I'll read out a few lines from Sri Aurobindo from this chapter to show how, Sri Aurobindo has a certain unique way of going to the heart of the issue and putting it in a few words and still bringing out the whole thing. Just see how Sri Aurobindo has looked at yamas and niyamas while talking about Raja Yoga. The preliminary movement of Raja Yoga is a careful self-discipline by which good habits of mind are substituted for the lawless movements that indulge the lower nervous being. So the preliminary steps, that is the yamas and niyamas, are a careful self-discipline, that the person is imposing this discipline on himself voluntarily, by which good habits of mind, we all know what those good habits of mind are. Those good habits of mind are substituted for the lawless movements that indulge the lower nervous being. The lawless movements of the vital, in which the mental collaborates, those lawless movements of the mental, which are all the time looking for profit and avoiding risk. All those lawless movements, lawless in the sense not following the law of the soul. All those lawless movements get substituted by what somewhere deep within we do know are the good habits of the mind. So substituting good habits of the mind for the normal lawless movements that indulge the lower nervous being. And then Sri Aurobindo goes on, by the practice of truth, by renunciation of all forms of egoistic seeking, by abstention from injury to others, by purity, by constant meditation and inclination to the divine Purusha, who is the true Lord of the mental kingdom, a pure, glad, clear state of mind and heart is established. Now see, most of the yamas and niyamas get covered in this one sentence. By the practice of truth, satya, by renunciation of all forms of egoistic seeking. All types of egoistic seeking would include the temptation to tell a lie, the temptation to steal, the temptation to hoard, the temptation to fall in for sensory pleasures. All these are egoistic seekings. By renunciation of all forms of egoistic seeking, by abstention from injury to others, ahimsa, one of the yamas, by purity, brahmacharya, you might say, by constant meditation and inclination to the divine, Ishwar Pranidhan, the last of the niyamas, in a way the ultimate niyama, by constant meditation and inclination to the divine Purusha, who is the true Lord of the mental kingdom and the physical kingdom. He is the Lord because it was the Purusha's concept which Prakriti has translated into action. So, through this, the person is getting tuned to, getting inclined to the divine Purusha, who is the true Lord of the mental kingdom. What does that lead to? Now that leads to the mind behaving. And what is that good behavior? The mind reaches a state of what Sri Aurobindo calls a pure, glad, clear state of mind. Pure, got rid of the impurities, usual impurities of sensory pleasure, temptation to tell a lie and violence and so on. So all those have been removed. So purity and glad and clear state of mind. So the person discovers that actually it's a glad state of mind. The emotional part of the being is looking for happiness, but then searching for it where it does not reside. That's another story. But here, now, it has discovered true happiness. So it's a glad state of mind, devoid of those dualities in which joy is coupled with sorrow. A glad and then clear state of mind, the intellect. The intellect is very clear. It is cleared of all those cobwebs, all those confusions which characterize it. One way of looking at it is that the person has achieved a mind in which the flow is like the flow of oil. If you spill water on the floor, how does it spread? In all sorts of zigzag lines. Put a little oil on the floor and it starts flowing. How does it flow? In a clear, straight, smooth line. So it has converted that haphazard, turbulent, disorderly flow into an orderly flow of the mind. A pure, glad, clear state of mind and heart is established. The lines are so good, let me read again how Sri Aurobindo has summed up all the yamas and niyamas in this. The preliminary movement of Raja Yogas is a careful self-discipline by which good habits of mind are substituted for the lawless movements that indulge the lower nervous being. By the practice of truth, by renunciation of all forms of egoistic seeking, by abstention from injury to others, by purity, by constant meditation and inclination to the divine Purusha, who is the true Lord of the mental kingdom, a pure, glad, clear state of mind and heart is established. But, Sri Aurobindo says in the next para, this is the first step only. Yamas and niyamas are the initial steps, the beginning. After that come the techniques, asana, pranayam, pratyahara, dharana, dhyan, and the culmination of it is samadhi, the product, the superconscious state. Now, if a person goes all the way, he achieves great siddhis, perfections of the mind. And these are no less impressive than the Hatha Yogic siddhis. For example, the ability to know the past, the ability to know the future, the ability to know what is going on thousands of miles away, the ability to know what is going on in somebody else's mind. This is one siddhi which perhaps all of us would like to possess. What is going on in somebody else's mind. The Raja Yogi is able to get all that. But then comes the warning from Patanjali himself, the one who has given us all the Yoga Sutras, which are the classic in Raja Yoga today, that if you stop at those siddhis, if you start using those siddhis, if you start displaying those siddhis, you will not go to the next stage, which is Kaivalya, that is total liberation. The total liberation will not come unless you are able to overcome even that egoistic feeling that now that I have arrived somewhere, after all these decades of sadhana, at least let me make use of it. If you are able to overcome that egoistic feeling of displaying it, showing it, then only you can go to the next stage. So, this is what Raja Yoga is about. Once again, very impressive accomplishments, but the weaknesses are similar to those in Hatha Yoga. Hatha Yoga seems to be meant only for a select few. The obsession is samadhi, and if the person spends decades on achieving that degree of perfection of the mind, reaches even the final stage of samadhi and kaivalya, how does it really help the world? How does it help anybody? How can he bring it into everyday life? So again, a similar limitation. Okay for a select few who want it, but certainly not for everybody, and apparently, at least apparently, does not help the world. Why I'm saying apparently is because Sri Aurobindo has acknowledged that a select few who do this may also be helping the world. And there's a beautiful line in Savitri which says, while talking about some such rishis dwelling in the forests in apparent seclusion, that these are people who help the world by world indifference. And how are they able to help the world by apparently being indifferent to the world? By sending those positive vibrations which create a certain type of atmosphere in the world. So that is acknowledged. But all the same, that is not the type of yoga that would suit most of us. And therefore, Sri Aurobindo's synthesis, in fact, takes only some elements from Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga, the basic elements, that is, the body should be in a good shape, the mind should be in a good shape, but it leans more heavily on the triple path of the Gita. Now, what is the triple path of the Gita? In that, it's a very user-friendly yoga in the sense that there are no elaborate practices. And instead of trying to make a higher principle work on the lower, as happens in case of Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. In Hatha Yoga, we are making the life force or prana work on the body, the physical part of the being. In Raja Yoga, we are eventually making the soul work on both the vital and the mental. And of course, indirectly it ends up working also on the physical to some extent. But we are making the higher principle work on the lower. The lower is rebellious, but then we are forcing it to behave. That is what we are doing. In Gita, the approach is different. We are using the ordinary instruments, that is the ordinary body and the ordinary mind, and trying to persuade them to preoccupy themselves with things which are not ordinary. So we are making ordinary instruments get preoccupied with extraordinary or not so ordinary preoccupations. That is what we are doing. And what are these three basic instruments that we have? The hands, the head, and the heart. So the hands for action, karma yoga, the heart for feelings, bhakti yoga, and the head for knowledge, thoughts, jnana yoga. So we are using the ordinary instruments that we have, turned to extraordinary preoccupations, extraordinary pursuits, turn a little away from our ordinary preoccupations, and thereby move towards the divine. And eventually, using the hands to serve the best, using the heart to love the best and the highest, and using the head to know truly what that highest is, to know and realize the divine. Now, apparently there are these three paths, but actually they are one. And let's see how that happens. And in each of these, again, there is a risk, there is a weakness, but and so on. So that Sri Aurobindo discusses while discussing each of these three. And in this particular chapter, he starts with knowledge, and he points out that the path of Jnana Yoga or knowledge is not about reading more and more books. He doesn't say that, but it's understood because what he says is, what is it about? It is about vichara. That is thinking about the divine, concentrating on the divine using our mind. We are turning the ordinary instrument, that is the mind, to the divine. We are thinking about it. So vichara. And if we use this vichara properly, what will we achieve? Viveka, that is discrimination. We will be able to discriminate what is right, what is wrong, what is good, what is bad. So vichara and viveka are the two basic elements in Jnana Yoga. Not reading more and more books as we sometimes think, And when we do that, what will it lead us to? It will lead us to the fact that, to the knowledge that what we are seeing is all Prakriti, the play of nature, and it is concealing something higher behind it, and this concealment is leading to an illusion which we call Maya. And therefore, if one goes to the ultimate point in Jnana Yoga and sticks only to Jnana Yoga, the risk involved is that realizing that behind the appearance is the divine and all this is an illusion, it is Maya, what can happen is that the person may reject the reality as it is manifested and say that I am concerned only with that ultimate reality, I don't care for all this. So rejection of the phenomenal reality is a risk, but it is not inevitable. Why? Because when the person learns that it is the divine behind all this, it will also develop a sense of devotion to the divine, the way Arjuna does in the Gita when he gets knowledge in the chapter 10 and 11, particularly in the chapter 11 when he gets a real sort of revelation with his eyes, so to say, the divine eyes which the Lord gives him. He is able to experience the divine, he becomes a devotee. He realizes the glory of the Lord and now he is a devotee. So, this knowledge is unlikely to stop with knowledge. It will make the person a devotee. And then the person would say, what is the use of all this knowledge and devotion if I do nothing for the object of my devotion? And how can I do something for the object of my devotion? By doing something for the other forms. Because yes, I have realized who I am through this knowledge. I am the divine, but then so is everybody else. So is everything else. and therefore let me do for something for those other manifestations of the divine around me. And therefore, he will translate this love of the divine into action, doing something for his fellow beings. So karma will come in. So it will not stop at knowledge. Then Sri Aurobindo talks about devotion. Devotion is about establishing a personal relationship with the divine. And for that a form is necessary, and human beings are given the divine many forms. He can develop an attachment to any of those forms, be it a guru, be it a god or a goddess. So he can develop a personal relationship with that, and through that the divine will work on the person and reveal the divine to him. Which means that the devotion will again not stop with devotion, it will lead to knowledge, direct descent of that knowledge without reading anything, without the intervention of the vichara and viveka. Directly the person can get that experience of the divine, and then once again he would say, what is the use of all this devotion and all this knowledge if I do nothing for the object of my devotion? Action will come in. So all three will come in. So although there is a risk, Sri Aurobindo says that even a perfect bhakta may move away from the world and get lost in raptures, that playing that thing and dancing and doing nothing else. The person can get completely lost in that, but that is not inevitable. The person is likely to get both the knowledge and also develop an aspiration to do something for the object of the devotion, and action will come in. So all three will come in. Then Sri Aurobindo talks about work, and he says that the beginning of karma yoga is with purification of the motive behind the work. And what is it that we do as the first step? Make the motive unegoistic. And if one continues with those unegoistic motives, that is not looking at the work as a means of fulfillment of ordinary desires and ambitions, then, and not looking upon oneself as a doer, that is the next step. That is another way the ego goes out of it. One starts realizing more and more that truly it is not just a figure of speech that I am only an instrument, but the person actually starts seeing that truly I would not be able to do anything unless I had been given certain abilities, certain circumstances in life, unless I had been given all this by the divine, I would not have been able to do what I am doing. So I am truly an instrument of the divine. And the person starts seeing the divine not only in all his actions, but he starts seeing the divine in all happenings in the world and everything that happens. And the result is that he is now moving towards knowledge. So the observations on his work, his truly being an instrument, the observations on so many other things which keep happening in his life and in the world around, and seeing the hand of the divine behind it, gives him that knowledge. And as he gets more and more of this knowledge, and as he becomes more and more enamored of the way the divine is working through him, devotion comes in, and therefore once again all three come in. So while once again, there may be a theoretical risk of the person getting stuck with unegoistic work. The person can, if he just stays at the mental level, because performing one's duty in a disinterested manner can be purely a mental attribute. Many people do that without getting deeper into spirituality. But if the person doesn't get stuck there, chances are that gradually he will also move from there to deeper knowledge and devotion. So in fact, the triune is one. The triple path of the Gita doesn't have three paths. It has three streams or three alternatives in the triple path, only for making a beginning. The person can make a beginning depending upon what the inclinations and the temperament of the person are. And then from there, if the person continues long enough and sincerely enough on the path, he'll eventually end up doing all the three. Then finally, Sri Aurobindo points out two major weaknesses of also the triple path. One of them is that it is indifferent to the physical and mental perfection. It does not talk about the techniques of asanas, pranayamas. It does not talk about the perfection of the body and the mind. It takes it for granted that the ordinary person has a good enough body and mind to be able to turn those instruments, that is the body and mind, towards the divine. So ordinary instruments are being turned towards an extraordinary pursuit. But how to perfect those ordinary instruments that the Gita does not talk about. But then, again, Sri Aurobindo uses words very carefully. He says, indifferent to the physical and mental perfection. It is not opposed to physical and mental perfection. Being indifferent is not the same as being opposed to. Which means that there is nothing that prevents a person who is doing the yoga of the Gita from using some of the techniques of Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga and improving the performance of the body and the mind. And that is what Sri Aurobindo has done in the synthesis. Techniques are permissible. Not only permissible, they are desirable, but there is no obsession with the techniques. So, one of the weaknesses of the triple path can be potentially that if we do not understand that indifference to physical and mental perfection is not the same as being opposed to physical and mental perfection, we will pay attention to the body and the mind even while practicing the triple path. The second weakness is that there's a tendency to select one of these three exclusively. Now that was not the intention of the Gita, but then that is what can happen. That was not the intention of the Gita, because it starts with action, because Arjuna was an action-oriented person. That is what suited him the best. Then when he becomes curious for knowledge, he is given the knowledge. And then when as a result of that knowledge he has become a devotee, the Gita talks about Bhakti Yoga. So there is a certain sequence that the Gita follows and eventually takes the person to a point where the triune has become one. For Arjuna, to fight is an action which is enlightened by knowledge and motivated by devotion. So all three have united. And therefore, we can't blame it on the Gita that it does it, but human beings with their limited sort of understanding can sometimes develop this tendency to select one out of these three paths exclusively. And that is also one of the things which Sri Aurobindo has very scrupulously avoided in the synthesis. So that's how Sri Aurobindo has now established the background for the synthesis by talking in this chapter about the three major systems of yoga which he has taken into account while working out this synthesis, and that is Hatha Yoga, Raja Yoga, and the triple path of the Gita. And you would have seen how he has looked at these three, and within a relatively short sort of a span of about 10 pages, he has looked at all the three, gone to the heart of all three of them, pointed out their strengths and weaknesses, and yet why it is important to take some elements from even Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga in the synthesis. He has established that background, and why his yoga leans more heavily on the yoga of the Gita than on Hatha Yoga and Raja Yoga. So all that background has been established in this chapter before Sri Aurobindo actually goes on to the synthesis, and you would see that within this short span of just about 10 pages, to bring out the essence of all the three schools and their strengths and weaknesses, and in a way that is unique. As I said, unique, the word unique is an understatement. He has truly done it in a way that takes us completely out of this world. So with that, my gratitude to the Gurus for the way this has been presented, and Sri Aurobindo presented it in this form, and of course we'll see more of it in subsequent sessions on the synthesis of yoga. The mother gave it a practical shape, which is again a great thing, because to ensure giving a practical shape to a grand idea with minimum dilution is not easy, and that is what the mother did. The question is about the etymology of Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga means the royal path, literally, and this term was popularized at least by Swami Vivekananda, who more or less equated it with Patanjali's yoga or the Ashtanga yoga. So there are three terms which are used more or less synonymously. It's called Patanjali's yoga because he is the one who systematized all that was known in this field, compiling it in the form of brief 192 sutras in his Yoga Sutras. So it's Patanjali's yoga. In those sutras, he named 8 limbs of yoga, and that is why it's also called Ashtanga yoga. And since it can be considered by some to be the royal path in yoga, and Swami Vivekananda, in his translation and commentaries on Patanjali's Yoga Sutras, he has given the title Raja Yoga to the book. The book is titled Raja Yoga, Conquering the Internal Nature. So that's how it's also called Raja Yoga. All 8 are a part of Raja Yoga. To say that only Dharana, Dhyan, Samadhi are Raja Yoga would not be right, because if that is all that Patanjali intended, he would not have talked about yamas and niyamas and so on. Why that is important is because there is a tendency in the general public sometimes to concentrate on the technique of meditation, which actually starts with the third limb, that is asana. And not only that, sometimes the concern is also samadhi. To start with asanas and pranayamas and use them as a part of the technique of meditation does not prepare the necessary background which can come only from yamas and niyamas. And of course, to talk of samadhi is like trying to unfurl the flag on the top of a building before even the building has been constructed. So therefore, it's important to not ignore the yamas and niyamas. Probably there is a certain inherent hierarchy, but same time that hierarchy should not be taken too literally, because they are interdependent. Eventually, they are all working towards a way that the manifestations of ignorance will give rise to manifestations in our everyday life which are based on a deeper knowledge. So that is what unites all of them. And to some extent the sequence may be arbitrary. But then why it is important to sort of not emphasize the hierarchy part is because that is what makes sometimes a person also look at these 8 limbs as 8 steps. Now, if you look at it as 8 steps, then it means that unless the person has completed the first 2, that is yamas and niyamas, the person is not qualified to go to the third limb, that is the asana. Then that would disqualify most of us from even practicing any asana. Because to achieve perfection in yamas and niyamas itself is more than a lifetime's job for most of us. And therefore there are 8 limbs. Ashtanga, anga means only limbs. It's not a step. Which means that there can be a certain amount of parallel processing. While becoming a better person from the ordinary point of view is important before we embark on the techniques, but the techniques don't have to wait for achieving perfection in yamas and niyamas. So one can start with the asanas, pranayamas and the meditative techniques before actually achieving perfection in yamas and niyamas. Because the two would complement each other. In fact, the perfection in yamas and niyamas will not come unless we also start using to some extent the other limbs. Because meditation would then facilitate that introspection which is required for that inner churning, which will make us realize our own lapses and limitations when it comes to the observance of yamas and niyamas. I could see some 2 strands in your question. One was about Sri Aurobindo's experiences, and the other was about what his yoga is about. And also you mentioned Savitri, which I'm glad you did, because that helps me answer the question. Because Savitri does have, in fact, not 1 but 3 yogas. Savitri has Sri Aurobindo's yoga, which he calls Ashwapati's yoga. Savitri has the mother's yoga, which he calls Savitri's yoga in Savitri. And besides that, it is full of plenty for all of us how we can bring into our own lives integral yoga, which is Sri Aurobindo's yoga. So all these yogas are there in Savitri. So Sri Aurobindo's yoga is integral yoga, and when it comes to his experiences, those are also there in Savitri. In the Yoga of the King, when he talks about all the journey through the various worlds, that world stairs, and then his experience of the Divine Mother and his pleading with the Divine Mother that he will not be satisfied with his own salvation and that he would like the world to change, all that is a part of his experiences.